this session is about clinical safety and health informatics. There's three of us performing. Myself, Manpreet Pujara, Clinical Director for Patient Safety. I've got Sebastian Alexander, my colleague, Strategic Clinical Lead, who will be speaking after me, and then Stuart Harrison, who's the Head of Clinical Safety. So, objectives for this afternoon. We're going to try and run this interactive if we can. We're likely to overrun if we do that. You just need to be aware. So some of the slides we'll have to flick through quickly. But I think if you've got a pressing question, then I think the thing to do is to ask if you want to. So, bearing that in mind, we're going to introduce the clinical risk management within the NHS Digital, including the work that we do as the clinical safety group, substantiate our position, talk about NHS Digital clinical safety and clinical risk management, the challenges that we're facing with new technologies and changing regulations, talk about the clinical safety training that we offer, and then hopefully have 15 minutes for discussion at the end. So this is all about assuring safer systems. So, we've heard the importance of safety. So the first thing is do no harm. And one of the things that I just want to point out, which isn't in any of these slides, is the bit about, just sounding better, the bit about safety starts at the requirements level. So quite often clinicians are involved and engaged later on when the requirements have already been written. I think we need to be involved from day one when you're developing a program and you're writing the requirements, because if you get the requirements wrong, then you start having hazards from that time on, and safety is compromised from that time on. And I have no shame in saying that there are times that you have to tell suppliers that they must do something rather than they should do something. We always get told off for musts. I've been told off myself in the past when doing some work in GP SOC, don't want too many musts. But the problem is that if we have too many shoulds, there is far too much variation, which introduces risks and workarounds for people. And there are examples of that in real life. So in terms of that safer assurance process, that's where it starts, and I think it affects every single one of us, because at the end of the day, we're all users, and we all have our own requirements from that system. So as NHS Digital, we sponsor two clinical safety standards, SKY 129 and SKY 160, that we're going to talk about later on at the moment, that enable for safer systems to be both developed and implemented within the NHS. So we've been working since 2005, which is 12 years. Compared to other industry, safety has not, been at the forefront within health in terms of health IT systems as it has perhaps in the aircraft industry and so on. And my engineering colleague will tell you a lot more about that. So we've provided training for about 1,800 delegates on clinical safety. So can I just ask, how many people in the room are clinical safety officers? Okay, thank you. And how many are medics? How many are nurses? And how many are allied health professionals? Okay, that's helpful. So we offer clinical safety training, and we will offer that to all of you, very competitively priced. There are other organisations that provide that safety, and we've got the last three slides on the training that we provide, along with how you can get involved if you're not trained and you would like to be trained. Of those 1,800 people, only 306, so not as many as you would expect, have returned for the refresher course. And we've got 5,236 people who've registered for the new online training. So previously we offered a 2-day training session. We now do a 1-day face-to-face training sessions, but you complete 7 modules online beforehand in your own time, and that is free to the NHS. Again, more to come later. We've clinically assured 600 plus health IT systems over the last 12 years. Awarded clinical authority to release in excess of 1,600 services. So every single service that you will be using. So some of those services may well be the spine. If you're a GP, you're using EPS or GP to GP. NHS Mail that you're all probably using. You know, they've all gone through a clinical safety case and have had a clinical authority to release certificate. Subject matter experts. Are we subject matter experts? Well, as I alluded to earlier on, we've only been going for the last 12 years. And we have actually led, despite that, in terms of safety. But as with all organisations, we have to challenge ourselves. And we did that about a year ago with a review of the clinical safety culture within our organisation. And an appreciative inquiry was done by one of my colleagues. And it was all about what does an organisation look like if it's going to have a strong clinical safety culture. And the result, surprisingly, and you've been hearing about this, is all about leadership. And so it's leadership, it's being a learning organisation. And one of the other things that's come out in the sessions before is, you know, how does the NHS learn so that things don't happen again? And building on the safety profile that we have and actually being aware of what's coming next so that you can engage at an early stage. We've done some work with academia, more of that to follow in Stuart's slides. And we've had some research done that's found that our existing practice of clinical safety is fit for purpose and resulted in the production of a tool called SMART, which again we will be talking about later. Sebastian, I think this is you.
So I'm Sebastian Alexander. I'm actually a general practitioner in Cambridge and do 6 sessions for general practice and also work for NHS Digital for about 4 sessions. But I think it's just, this is the start. And I was just at a very brief session with Sir Liam Donaldson downstairs talking on who's now envoy for WHO, and he was just saying that he was involved with the Blair administration back in 1998, and he wrote, as you probably may not remember, an organisation with a memory, and that was the start of the clinical safety movement. He brought in James Reason to do a lot of the work, to write the documentation, and the Patient Safety Agency was founded back then. So these standards we're talking about, SCI, SCCI 0129 and SCI 160, they're published under the Health and Social Care Act. They've been formally approved by the Secretary of State and NHS England, and the standards really say that you are obliged to follow the recommendations and the standards within the NHS England. And they are really important, so I wanted to know, who knows about the standards before have you, many of you heard of this, are really good. SCI stands for Standardisation Committee for Care and Information, and we are a member of SCI, NHS Digital, and we have delegated authority to accept the standards for health and social care. These must be followed, and they are now ingrained and really embedded within the NHS, more so than they were this time 3 years ago. They were first introduced back in 2009 under DSCNs at that stage, and then that changed the Information Standards Board. Now we have these SCI standards. There are no doubt they'll change again in the future, but really important. And I thought it would be useful just to run through them really quickly. And I'll bring all these up because you have to. So this really covers all health IT systems that are around. There are no exclusions to that. It includes mobile apps, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and also includes telehealth. So really stretching the boundaries of what we've been dealing with previously into new applications. And it also considers failure, an IT failure, and where the patient safety risks are. And this doesn't look at those IT systems controlled by the medical devices regulations. And I think there's a lot of confusion and around medical devices approval, and that's something else we're going to talk about a little bit later, how we're addressing that at the moment. Traditionally, things have been compartmentalized into medical devices and IT software, and that's really confusing, and the boundaries are blurring, really. We don't look at scope for IG, information governance, financial reporting, and statistical reporting tools. But again, information governance IG issues can affect patient safety, as we all know. So I just wanted to talk about the links. Now these are easily found, the Sky 129 for manufacturers of IT systems, and Sky 160 for deployment and use of health IT systems. And the links are given there. But are really useful, easily accessible and easily readable documents. Some years ago we compressed the documents down into smaller numbers of pages, and they've become much more easily understandable with better guidance notes really, and better ability to understand them. I thought I'd just briefly mention these because we spend a lot of time with organizations who are manufacturing software, and these are so important, as Manpreet was saying, really. So Sky 0129, so that the manufacturer must define and documentate all the clinical risk management processes. So they must make available sufficient resources, they must assign a competent personnel, and also must nominate a clinical safety officer. And I'm pleased to say that most IT suppliers now do have a clinical safety officer. So that's someone who's, again, the standards define what is a clinical safety officer, but a clinical safety officer is someone who has appropriately been trained in risk management and IT system risk analysis, and also someone who's registered with a registered body, i.e. the GMC, Nursing Midwifery Council, or an allied health professional group, or the Pharmaceutical Society. So it's really to make sure that all appropriate levels of IT systems and authorization are defined very closely. I think more of a problem, though, really, is sometimes the definition of the must. There are 6 musts here. I won't read them through, but essentially the whole process of this is producing a clinical safety case and a hazard log. So really the manufacturers must make sure they introduce a risk management file and must introduce a logging process for their system. And that will be backed with test evidence and assurance data as well. So those are the manufacturing musts, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. We have Sky 160, which is to do with the implementers, so the healthcare organizations. Again, this is, I think, slightly more difficult in practice because we often find that healthcare organizations struggle with the first bullet point of making available resource, or suitable available resources for time for the work. We have many clinical safety officers who are working half a PA or 2 PAs. There's no standard definition of how much time this work takes. But they have a responsibility under the standards to make available sufficient resource, and that's not just around CSO time, but also admin support time as well. Also, they must nominate a clinical safety officer. We are finding more and more healthcare organisations now have a CSO or CCIO who's named as a clinical safety officer. I think in primary care that's more of a problem. With the commissioning groups, that's still not universal as yet, but again, a piece of work we're involved with is trying to raise the profile of this. And really, the standards will define the ability of the organisation to be able to deploy that piece of software. Likewise, there are a number of musts. There's an additional must on the bottom, which is, I suppose, the catch in that the health organisation must ensure that the manufacturer of health IT systems comply with SCI 0129. So that final compliance document or statement is vital, because again, we sometimes find that health organisations haven't looked at the manufacturer's safety case and really haven't checked whether the manufacturer comply with SCI. Many organisations now are writing into their contract that their health IT supplier must have complied with SCI 0129. So that's becoming more frequently seen in contract documentation. So there are a number of, I don't know, you won't be able to see this, but these are just some screenshots of some documents. But if you go onto the standards website, there's some cut down guidance, which is really useful, about 18 pages. There's some more detailed guidance of about 30 pages around clinical risk management. And there are some very useful flow charts and tools. And I think the most useful thing of all this is actually some compliance guidance, which so you can fill in an Excel spreadsheet yourself, and this comes up with some a compliance document that gives you some scoring around this. But it's a really useful system. So we've spent a lot of time on these documents to make sure they're more easily usable. And again, I just like to has anybody else looked at the guidance documents behind the standards? Now, we all know about the standards, but just can I have a hand show of who has actually looked at some of these? Because it's a few of you. Okay, well done. But I think it's really important to try and have a look behind the guidance documents behind these, because they help you a lot to try and pick your way through what is needed. We spend most Friday lunchtimes on clinical safety group being presented with clinical safety documentation, and we award the clinical authority to release for IT systems. And we quite frequently find that some of the trusts coming on to CSG haven't really looked into the documentation in sufficient detail. So I think it's there to help you. And as I said right at the beginning, we're just starting this story. We've got a long way to go. This is the way things are at the moment. In 2 or 3 years' time, things will be changing again, I'm sure, or a year's time. We've got mobile devices, apps. So these don't really fit what we're doing at the moment, I don't think. We've got the MHRA doing their own thing. So I think it's the beginning of a story. I'll hand over to Stuart, if I could. We'll take some questions. One question.
I have a question. Rob Alcock, I'm CCIO at Gateshead. I may have missed it in the. Thank you, CCIO at Gateshead. I may have missed it in the guidance, but which is why I would be interested in clarification. When a bad thing happens, post-deployment, bad things happen. We've heard a lot today, this morning, around the need for the NHS to do better at learning and sharing the learning from when things happen. And I think many of us around the country will be aware of quite bad IT things having happened, where the main focus of attention, certainly from the senior people in the trust, has been the hope that it will stay out of the press and that it won't be widely shared. And I think, I'm not sure everybody in the country will know about what happened with lab services in Leeds. We've had a recent really alarming thing with 35,000 letters not in fact being delivered that were thought to have been delivered electronically. We know about the guidance saying, well, we can hold our suppliers to account and using these instruments to compel them to make changes because the safety issues are troubling. Is there a mechanism whereby anybody, either ourselves or the suppliers, are required to let the centre know so that the centre can have confidence and assurance that the suppliers have told their other customers about this fatal flaw in the system which has suddenly rolled us over? And I just worry that how do we know that we were an isolated trust that got hit by this particular thing?
We're depending a lot on the notification. So in this instance, there's no problem in you phoning up the service desk, the safety desk, and telling us about the problem.
It's not mandatory, is it?
No.
So the question is, should it be?
It's recommended that you do that, but we can't. It's very difficult to mandate reporting. It's rather like Datex.
Well, I'm not sure it's that hard, because if the guidance for manufacturers requires them to do that, then the jeopardy, if they are shown not to have done it, is quite great.
Yeah, but we can't. We can recommend and say you must do it, but who's policing that?
Well, you've got to be policing. But ultimately, the suppliers depend on the continued accreditation that sell their products to the NHS.
Yeah.
What you're talking about there is a regulatory environment, which traditionally is the MHRA's remit. And originally, when we first started this, there was nothing that dealt with software as a medical device until we started these standards.
Indeed. And they've been really helpful.
Nowadays, the challenge that we've got, is that the MHRA's scope has widened, and we now have to integrate, which will be part of my bit, we integrate with the MHRA to align with that. So we've tended to catch all outside of the MHRA, and the principle behind them being self-declaration and not within a regulatory environment is that it builds a community of interests, and it challenges the industry from a different viewpoint in so much as it encourages best practice and not mandates and regulates and forces it, because that sometimes hides the truth. From an engineering perspective and from an engineer, regulatory frameworks in other industries tend to be very patent heavy, restrictive, and not as interoperable or as innovative as healthcare should be. And so that's where we've tried to bridge that gap. So we have two standards. The supplier has an obligation. They hand over the system with a safety case that says that it's fit for purpose, and they hand over that baton to the health organisation who will implement it. And by that mutual understanding of the shared interest in clinical safety, then they manage the and by being competitive, by stating the compliance with the standard above their peers or above their competitors, will encourage a better practice, we have found in the last 10 years to be better. Now, there's a number of other initiatives as well around NHS improvement, an upgrade of the database, the old NRLS database from the MPSA, to adopt more health informatics and health IT terms. If it's a formal engagement with NHS Digital, then the supplier will be adopted into what's called the service portfolio or the service catalogue, and so they're duty bound to publish their service incidents. There's a national warning about incidents when things go wrong and so on. But we also get, with the community of interest that we've built, suppliers that aren't part of that framework, that formal framework, also telling us, by the way, we've had a problem with this. And they actually come and seek our help because we have tended to be in some areas better connected with the clinicians and the health organisations than they are. So it's in that interest, but with the work that we're doing with the MHRA, it's kind of closing the circle, so to speak, without wanting to throw too many buzzwords in. I've found a watch as well. Is there a cash converters nearby? It's a nice one too.
Hi, is it working? Sorry. I'm Jeff Llewellyn, CCIO from Tameside, and I completely agree with my colleague from Gateshead. I sometimes get clinical safety notices when actually it was identified a month ago, and I'd like to have known when, say, a trust first reported to a company. My gripe, and this is me probably being personal, and people might not agree with me, is the NHS, we at Tameside use the 1 to 25 matrix for clinical safety. We have high risk, red risks, all this sort of stuff, and then we have a target risk of where we want to be. My biggest problem, and we use DXC Lorenzo at Tameside, the scoring mechanism of the companies for when they risk rate is different to the NHS, and the number of times as CCO, and I'm part leading it, is like a fight, and I have yet to see an IT company ever release a high risk. It's almost like it's no disrespect if there are CSOs in the room from companies, but it's almost like it's we are not allowed to put out a high risk, guys. They've got medium and moderate is the only thing we're allowed ever to do. And I think that's wrong. Sometimes a company needs to say, guys, it's a high risk, here's the mitigation, this is what we recommend. And even some of the mitigations when they come out, I think NHS Digital should push more, it's scenarios like we had one with Lorenzo with results that could have been wrong. The mitigation, doctors should double check diagnostics. Brilliant.
I can probably answer that question. We met, didn't we, last year or year before?
We did, sorry.
We've got a history, and we butted heads a couple of times, didn't we?
Yeah.
So this isn't a loaded delegate, and there's also other users of Lorenzo as well. That supply has gone through a period of change, and we've recognised that. And this organiser, it takes the time to action various things, especially something as significant of that. There's been a significant downscaling of resources in that company, and a period of international rescoping to do with international clinical standards, of which we'll be leading on later this year. We have an action to have another session, closed session with that company, their clinical director. We've got a new in-post clinical safety director, and we're going to have a closed session with them to specifically address that. We don't like the fact that we have to negotiate and debate. A clinical risk is a clinical risk in my book. The way that you assess it and the way you communicate it should not hinder the mitigating actions. So we're hoping this year to have some significant headway on that. So I really don't care what risk matrix they use, what process they use, that if their customer says there's a problem, then they should address that problem. And it's changing that view. But I must say that isn't negative. We've worked with that particular company since we started these safety standards, and we've had good and bad relationships along that way. But we've got history with them, and I'm committed to make a change in that particular area. So watch this space. We'll have another event like this in a few months, and hopefully it'll be quite successful.
Helping Gateshead is one of the things that we're doing is 20 plus hospitals that use that same IT product are creating a clinical safety group. Looks like I'm a bit of hospital chair for that, but that's the way that those 20 hospitals can talk to each other about clinical safety on the day when it happens. So that's my aim, to say, here's the problem, is anyone else seeing it?
We must press on, but I believe we might. It's okay. We've got a presence in that as well, haven't you?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry. It's okay. I'm here. It doesn't matter. Saves me speaking.
My point is that it's so much about compliance that people just tick a box and say I've done it, rather than actually they do it well. And is that better? So I've had exactly the same experience. It's very hard working. It's very hard to distinguish between 0129 and 0160 when you're doing some developmental work with a company.
Hopefully I can address that.
Right, but it's what you're asking to do is comply. It's all about compliance rather than adding value. And so they're ticking a box to say yes, we've done it. And when you look at it in detail, they haven't really done it at all. They've just ticked a box, which I find really depressing.
Yeah, me too. Oh, hopefully I can. Yeah, if you park that question, and I hope I can answer it here, because Is that, no, all right, okay, right. I'm going to ramble around the slides and through them because we're pushed for time, and I need to substantiate some of the things I say. We've got a lot of buzzwords in this industry around innovation, interoperability, and what is disruptive technology. Now, the true definition's here from Professor Christensen, Harvard University. I don't believe some of the stuff that we're talking about is truly disruptive. And so that it's a very subjective subject, but this is the grounds for my understanding and my definition of this. In particular around our anticipation that technology and new technology will be the shining light and solve all of our problems and innovate just for the success and its shiny and new gadgetry. Again, I don't believe that that's the way forward as well. We need to control or temper the innovation. But standards alone won't bring us there. We need, here are some, I'm going to whiz through these because we're short on time. These are some examples of some of the technologies and some of the program areas that we're dealing with in NHS Digital at the moment that are considered under the generic banner of innovative or disruptive. However, this is from the BSI, British Standards Institute. A recent paper is only about a month old, and there's a diagram, a nice picture towards the end. You can have these slides as well, I'm not precious about them. Standards alone won't get us there. We need tools, we need guidance, and that old chestnut of collaboration. But we're taking that collaboration bit a little bit of a step further. And some of the things that we're doing have been backed up by academic research and some industry leaders in health informatics recommending and agreeing with us that the direction that we're taking in clinical risk management is the right one. So again, these are some of the links that one of the particular areas that I like to focus on is the Code for Health area, in so much as it's taking several different clinical specialities and publishing open source code for suppliers to reuse under a particular license framework. The links to the programme is there to read. We've been asked to come along for the ride, so to speak, with the Code for Health programme. They're very fast and very rapid and very agile in the way that they develop as a programme. But what we've done is a very light touch clinical risk management system that governs the whole process, that allows suppliers to develop their systems free of any of these compliance, the regulations and so on, but with an element of common sense around clinical risk assessment and products and code and so on as we move on. Now, we've had a couple, the domain stuff, the P2020 stuff, you all should know about. We dip in and out of interoperability standards and some of the toolkits and test tools and development tools and frameworks that we are unleashing on the supplier domain. One in particular is the health apps space. We've got a nice landing page for patients and clinicians to search for apps, and a second page that gives the overall background, intended use, if that's a word we can use in this context, and any of the endorsements and so on of those apps. So it's a little bit better than what we've seen previously in some of the libraries or app stores. One thing of interest, which is around the tools initiative, is to provide the developer community access and a forum in which they can develop their systems even further, downloads, design, articles, case studies and so on. And this is the unique bit, this is the bit that falls into the disruption around the technology. So it should not be unique for the supplier, you should be able to share this kind of information. Harking back to the academic study that we had done in collaboration with the Royal Academy of Engineering, it was done with engineering because I'm a safety engineer by trade, so it gave me the challenge as whether I'm operating due diligence and to best practice. It came up with a couple of spin-off projects that were contributory to this community of interest that I'm banging on about quite a lot in the training courses and some of these speaking events. So all of these publications are freely available, and the links you can get access to. One of the outputs has been an app, very simple app. It's very simple in its design, but it proves the concept that the tool that we've developed that takes a lot of the effort for the compliance stuff, the argument that we were talking about, the lady was saying about compliance and regulation and so on, it being hard work, we've developed a prototype tool that will do the safety modelling for you based on a clinical workflow. There's a case study there with a safety case that proves that it's quite efficient and it works quite well. We're developing it on an open source platform, so it's freely available for anybody to use. And it's going to be modular, so we're going to drop in a few additional modules that will address some of the harder subjects like clinical decision support, multiple hazard assessment techniques, and other things like that. But it means that you pour the information into this one space, and at the click of a button it will develop your safety argument for you. And we found with some of our early prototype study that suppliers and clinicians from both camps, NHS and otherwise, absolutely love it. It builds into this diagram's from the British Standards paper that I referenced earlier, and it's a more dynamic model for developing systems, and it comes into its own from an independent review at a clinical decision support issue that we had last year, where developers need to have the flexibility to develop systems in their own unique environment without hindrance from regulation or compliance matters. But the moment they start building in some live-like data and looking to prototype these systems using an engineering term, they need to add in the flexibility around guidelines and regulations and standards. So we're helping in this space by providing those guidelines, those case studies, and the only way we can leverage that is by bringing in academics, Royal Colleges from the clinical profession, but mainly academics as well, and industry groups. So this is finally summarising. We're setting up a joint working group with the MHRA. We're finalising the memorandum of understanding between our two arm's length bodies to specifically address the gap or the bridge between our standards and theirs. We've been requested to lead on the ISO 80001 Joint Working Group 7, so that will bring in an international view on clinical risk management and the standards. So to summarise, we know that standards aren't the be-all and end-all. We know that they're hard for some people who aren't familiar with them to digest, which is why we put case studies together. We give people tools to work with them, and leading on as well, we do a lovely, well, these are some pictures of the tools that we've gone through. We do a lovely training course as well. This was developed with on the e-learning for health portal, the NHS portal, and with Health Education England. And that's a summary of the modules that are available. Every year we try to add a couple of additional best practice guidelines. We're going to put another 2 on there this year around clinical decision support and something else that it's probably going to be either an uplift of some existing modules because the technology's changed or the industry's changed slightly, or something else that we need. It's a one-day course. It's a key message for me is this training is not the only thing that's out there, but we know we do it well, and we're actually going through. We're at the moment self-accredited as a NHS training standard that's actually owned and sponsored by NHS Digital. There's a new training standard out there which looks at the education of me per year, the ability of us to actually deliver training, standing up speaking here, stealing watches off clinicians that aren't looking, and pretty much putting us in that space of why would we call ourselves and this service an accredited service. So, and it's open to anybody, any other organisation can go through this, but we've challenged ourselves to say, well, we need to provide some fit-for-purpose training, no matter what the subject is, and we'll be audited on it this year, so we're constantly challenging ourselves. There's links in the presentation, and I've got some business cards, not a lot, but you can come and see me later. So I've cut this, apologies, I've cut this down because we've had some challenging questions, but you kind of get it. Standards alone aren't the answer. And we're willing, and we are setting up a number of initiatives around tools, case studies and academic liaison to prove what we're doing is okay and to bring on board the research and the innovation in a more controlled fashion. So are there any questions? Does that answer your question? Kind of. But we can have a chat after if you want.
So we've got 10 minutes for questions, and I just want to start off by saying, thank you for my watch. I just want to start off by saying that the message that you were giving earlier on isn't wasted. So we've registered what you're saying. Yeah, and I think one of the key things for trying to offer this training and for people to come to us is because we then have that link with you. And actually we need to work together collaboratively to ensure that the right thing is done for the NHS, because you shouldn't have to be fighting the same battle over and over and over again. We should do it once and fix it. So that has been registered, just wanted to say, but we've got another 7 or 8 minutes for questions, if anybody's got anything.
Hi, I'm a consultant psychiatrist from Greater Manchester Mental Health Trust. I'm also the IMNT clinical lead. Recently, we've had a change of the electronic patient record system. My question is around, these providers, IT providers, they are commercial organizations. During the procurement process, they kind of come up with all the kind of sales pitch and the support arrangements. But once the contracts are in place, once the system is implemented, up and running, we have lots of issues, a lot of clinical safety issues, clinical usability issues, the staff experience, and we have a huge list of development requests, change requests. But the provider does not prioritize these requests. They have their own kind of pace. And as I said, they are commercial organizations, and if they are not held accountable in the regulatory environment, how as an NHS trust we can try and kind of ensure quality of care, patient safety. The whole point for us to change from one electronic system to the other system was because we had kind of a sore relationship with the previous provider. They weren't up to speed with the support arrangements, so we therefore had to change to a new system, and we are having the same problems with the new system providers.
I think the first instance for me would be to see if this supplier has complied with the standards and have a look at that. So I'd be willing to, if they have. So then, if they have, then they. Is that within your contract as well with them? Was that as part of the tendering process that that you would seek a system that was compliant? Yeah. So then you should also have within those service level agreements around high severity service incidents having to be fixed within a 12 or 24 hour period, and also the availability of the service, either whether that's 9 to 5 or 24/7 cover. So there should be some commercial penalties and some commercial levers and payments that you can withhold from a service management point of view with that supplier if they're failing to meet their obligations there. And it sounds as though they may only be, at the moment, willing to work with the financial side of things if they're spinning too much of a commercial side on it. The other thing will be I can give you my details and we can work with you, because we own these safety standards and we could act potentially as an independent arbitrator if you have any issues, as we are doing with with the other supplier that we've mentioned earlier on in this session. So we'd be more than willing to. So I wouldn't go with a baseball bat. I'd go with a begging ball, and I'd just be a bit more positive with them and ask them, we've been made aware about this kind of thing, and first be positive and be nice. And then see what we can do afterwards if they don't play with us. So my simplistic view on that would be actually, when you're procuring systems, it's actually, particularly if the supplier has got a CSO and they're aware of the standards, one of the standards as an organisation that you need to abide by is the 160, which is the deployment. And they need to work in partnership with you in order to deploy that product safely.
And I personally, I would have thought I'd be tempted to even have that in the contract to ensure that they're working in partnership throughout, rather than, you know, they're just there to deliver a system which they say is accredited, and then, you know, your clinicians are having to do workarounds or whatever, because actually the system doesn't do exactly what you wanted it to do.
You've already got contract in place, haven't you? So that we can't. That's a bit after the event at the moment. But it's what we do. We try to build that partnership at the outset, but be more than happy to work with you to see if you can get you where you need to be.
Manpreet, please forgive me. My name is Umesh Prabhu. I've been medical director for 12 years. I'm releasing 6 books about my life, and I've seen Simon Stephen many times. He took me to meet the Queen for my contribution. Monday morning, I feel it's an exciting time to be in NHS. Friday evening, I tell my wife, thank God I'm retired. So, but even my wife thinks I'm retired. I love NHS too much to retire. The question I want to ask you is this. There are many elephants in the room. Number one, yesterday I was in Patient Safety Congress. I gave lecture how vegan was reduced harm by 90% in 6 years, how we got 45 awards. Guess what? 350 people in the audience, only 5 black and ethnic minority. 45% of doctors in this country are black and ethnic minority. 25% staff is black and ethnic minority. Leadership is no you white pigs. So good to see all of you doing fantastic job. My books are coming one by one, and I can tell you what I'm going to write in that book. My question or suggestion is, Simon Stephen and myself shared the platform 2 years ago in Wigan. Devomank is the pilot for the country, Devolution Manchester. My sincere request to you, you're doing a fantastic job. Go and meet John Rouse and tell them we can help you, because without this, they are not going to transform anything in NHS. So Devomank is the pilot for the country. Hopefully they'll get additional funding. And I personally, Stephen Dobson is the IT director for that. I think you got to meet him. All those problems should be sorted, because medical directors have come together. They have agreed common packs, common IT for 2.8 million population.
Thank you, Manpreet. We'll take that on.
That was a big
one. Last round.
Stephen is a good friend of mine. I'll introduce.
Sorry, just a very quick question. You're saying that you have sort of reviewed and accredited over 600 IT systems and services. Is that list available for people to access and check against? So while companies can say that they're accredited, is there a way of checking that and verifying?
At the moment, no. We've been trying to do it for a couple of years now. This sounds like an excuse, but it's not. We've got a revitalised industry liaison and relationship with Digital Health, Tech UK and the like, and we have every intention of publishing all of the information around compliance. What we have to do is to look at where we sit legally, because some of the clinical, what we're talking about is a clinical authority to release an approval certificate at a time and date for that system with some known either disclaimers or caveats. So we just need to double check that we're not being culpable in any kind of legal aspects around the disclaimers and the caveats that we're publishing, because it's the intellectual property of the supplier. So once we get to that position, you'll see immediately a list, and it will be quite a dynamic list because we do this every week. We've got systems going through every week. But we do try to encourage the suppliers to publish it on their own websites, because we often find that for us to build this community of interest, if they're publicised that they meet the standard and their competitors don't, their competitors will come to us. So we're constantly trying to challenge and raise that quality bar. But we will get there, and I'm hoping it will be by the end of this year.